Great, thanks, Paul, and once again, thanks to Christine and Costa. This has been a month of culture change and ethics. I'm sure a few of you are feeling rather cultured out by the time we get to the end of this. And just to share with you, next month we've got another guest speaker. That's Paul Grobler. I can see him on the session, and he and I will be talking through master data and doing a very similar type of thing of how do you talk master data to an EIM manager or the head of EIM? How do we talk master data to a data citizen? How do you get them excited? How do you get them involved? How do you get them to understand their commitments? We then also talk to the professionals, and that will almost be all of the aspects. And of course, when we talk to execs, then we've got to change our language completely. And that's certainly what today's scenario is about. But we'll be talking about values and change and culture today. Next month, we'll be talking about master data. So we'd love to have you guys involved. Costa, thanks again for your involvement. And Christine, thank you. And thank you for everyone for joining. And let's go on. Okay, so the first element that we wanted to look through was a Harvard Business Review that stated that only 28% of the employees believe there's alignment between the company's actions and the stated values. And I was fascinated this week to read about all sorts of companies in terms of the pandemic. The CEO is saying, you know what, guys, you aren't working hard enough. And that means that we're going to come back into the office. And then someone turned around and said, yeah, but then you've been using the company jet to fly to the islands and stuff like that. Now, what was interesting, one of the industry analysts said, it's sort of okay at the moment where they're really doing well, but when they start to have challenges, then this sort of misalignment between the stated values and the actions are an interesting observation. So with that Harvard review, I was interested that they said only 28% believe, but for me, the problem statement is 72% believe that the values that are being stated by the companies, and there was another comment this month or this week to say people are purpose washing their mission statement and value statement. So everything's about the purpose and the good of mankind, but it doesn't align up with what they're doing. And Nike was caught in this one as well, where they were talking about how they were so involved in their employees and stuff like that, but they were giving work out to people that use child labor. So these things are picked up pretty quickly and detected pretty quickly. And I have to apologize to the execs right now as to say, the people that can fix this problem is not the guys at the bottom. We just the observers of it, but it's the and they've got to set this tone. They've got to correct the culture. It's not to say you can't correct it, but you have to start doing something to correct it. So how do we correct it? How do we start correcting this? And we must remember this is a data scenario. So we will create a value-based decision-making model that's supported with data to assure alignment of action and stated values. Okay, so how do we get about this value-based decision-making model? Okay, so this is the discussions that we're going to have. I'm going to take you through the core concepts. Christine's going to talk about culture and change. Costa's he really enjoys this one of not having rule books and dictation and control and command. Is how do we get away from that and live the values? Then we'd like to just share with you some of the material. Okay, so, and this is the VBDM, that's your value-based. Okay, so starting off, this was a slide that we put together during the month of talking about the interactions between governance, culture, and ethics and data. Certainly, it's the behavior, the personal morality, that we focus on with the ethics and the culture change. Then governance and culture change, we focus on subcultures and the community. And between governance and ethics, it's all about actions, procedures, expectations, and that's where we talk about throw away the rule book and live the values. Because people don't listen to what you say, they pick up what you do. Very similar to your kids, or certainly mine. Okay, I want to just simplify these comments, right? So if you're talking to an exec, you need a very simple statement to the exec in terms of what do we mean by culture. And I'm certainly not intimating that the execs don't understand culture. But if we were to describe it, and specifically with respect to culture, is what happens when the managers leave the room and they have to start working with the data and coming up with answers. What do they do? So the simple question that you need to ask yourselves, and it would be helpful to see how you guys feel, do the employees make the right decisions that benefit all stakeholders at the right time and for the right reason, even in the absence of authority or involvement with the owners or the stakeholders in that situation? So if the answer is yes to this, then we believe you have a healthy culture. There's trust, empowerment. The managers feel that they can delegate it to the employees. The employees can get on with it and get the answers out and respond to the stakeholders appropriately. And you'll notice whenever that trust is not there, then there's almost this sort of this translation happening between the employee, the exec or the owner or the manager, and then to the stakeholder. If it's not, then it's a good time for the execs to understand why, and then go into the transformation. And I loved some of the pandemic discussions that are happening. Is this, bad companies with bad culture are destroyed by a crisis. Good companies will survive them, and great companies are improved by them. So this pandemic really has a way of testing our culture and testing our values that do they have the trust that we talk about? So that's the important thing with culture. How do we validate that we have the right culture? It's a simple question, simple answer, and if you're not getting the right answer, then you have to start working out why it's not there. Okay, ethics validation. So remember we spoke on earlier with data privacy to say how do we explain the difference between privacy and ethics. And I feel it's a simple statement like this. If our stakeholders benefit, we benefit. If our stakeholders are harmed, we suffer. And it is ensuring that we are always paying attention to what are the needs of our stakeholders. So the question you need to be asking yourself is, have you framed your purpose based on your needs or on the needs of the stakeholders? So when you look at your purpose statement, when you look at your mission statement, and guys, I appeal to you, you can apply this in the same way to your data governance, your master data mission and purpose. How are you proposing that purpose, and how are you supporting the needs of your stakeholders? Okay, so if the answer is stakeholders, then we believe you're reaching that Ubuntu of data where there's a culture of mutual respect and trust, and we're developing this harmonious relationship. If the answer is focusing on us, for example, how do I do better master data, then you've got to stop talking about your benefits and start talking about why it benefits them. And I remember having a discussion with Paul on this, and he was doing some interesting business strategy work and things like that. And when you originally write your purpose and your vision, it's all about me. It's about what I've got to do, what I've got to achieve. And it's very little about your customer and what you're going to provide them and what issues you're going to deal with. Okay, so people don't buy what you do. Okay, I mean, it's great for you to understand what you do, but if you're selling them on how the most amazing advisor you are and how you advise people and what you do and things like that, some people may be interested, but with the wealth of information that we're getting on the internet, that's not something that they log on and they see, oh, that's my problem, and you're going to fix my problem, right? So the people buy why you do it, and especially if it relates to them and the challenges they are having. Okay, when we get into governance, so why do we do governance? And from our side, a simple statement is we ensure that data is used to achieve the highest good. Okay, and we can see this on the right-hand side. This is from Gartner to say these are the most important aspects of data governance. And we last week we spoke about the Ubuntu of data, and we described the data fear dystopia. What happens when people start fearing data, the data hoarding, and then the Ubuntu of data. So if we were to go about asking the question, ask your question: are people fearful of the data that you are presenting and that you have? And when we say people, that could be employees, the board, the stakeholders, the customers. Do they value the data that you have, or do they look at it with a level of disbelief and say, well, we're not really sure why you've got that data and what you're using it for and whether it answers our questions? Or are they hoarding data? Okay. Or do they value the data that we have as an organization? So if the answer is fear, then what we require is a dose of transparency. And you can see on this almost we call it a seesaw, where you sort of dipping down into fear of data, and you can get even worse where the data is misleading. People will start withdrawing from the data, or if you start to reestablish the trust with change and action, then you're coming back to that highest good. And when we start with the hoarding of data, that's where you get either within a department or across big companies. We need to start sharing and collaborating. That's how we correct it. That's the correction that we need to bring about. And if we have the value of data, then we've got to keep going to ensure that we get social harmony and the use of the data. Okay, so in summary, that's what we're trying to achieve. That's how we know where we are. Depending on the answer, we have to then apply the correction, take the tablets, take the medicine, and start fixing the challenge that you are facing. All right, and then we go down to the data validation, and I really like these two simple presentations that I believe it was Deloitte, and they said today, and this was all about justifying digitalization or the digitization transformation. And they said, today, is the executive suffering with these questions? How am I supposed to make decisions if I'm constantly surprised with the answers or with the results? Decisions are made by gut. I can't make the right call based on data. So they don't trust the data that they got, and they've got to sort of now add to it and add their own interpretation. And then the other one is, how can we plan if we don't know what's coming and when? So if we've got no forecasting, if we're not getting to that level, we've got some challenges with our data, and we desire to reach this tomorrow state, which is where people can see it, they can see the goals, they can see the trends, and it's answering their questions. So my summary for that is, from a data point of view, is the data enhancing the business decision-making and measurement with reliable data, information, knowledge, and wisdom? So are we achieving this? Is your data trustworthy to answer business questions and support business decision-making? Is it there? And if the answer is yes, fantastic. Then the idea is that you've got to keep on improving the value of the data assets. It's a never-ending scenario where you'll get new questions, you'll get new decisions that need to be made depending on the context, the pandemic, and you're going to have to keep on working on it. If the answer is no, then you need to bring about a data sophistication journey. You need to establish that within your organization. And the best thing to do that is to use the business value chain and enhance each segment of the chain. So make sure that for one segment of the chain, you can bring about this transformation of data, information, and knowledge. And if it's a maybe, then you've got to understand where you're battling and then improve and remove the business friction in those areas. What's stopping the flow? what's getting through. All right, so that was the core elements of what we refer to as the decision-making model, the value-based decision-making model. Are there any questions, observations? Costa, is there anything you'd like to add? Christine?
Howard, sorry, somebody asked a question about which stakeholders are important. And I think when you look at culture and values, I mean, you have obviously, you have your customers, you have your shareholders, you have all your external, all your various stakeholders, your community and society. And it's a balancing act, isn't it? I mean, you know, return of investment and shareholder value is important for executives. I mean, that's an important consideration. And to be outward looking as well, the demands of society and community, and obviously meeting the needs. So you have to, I guess it's a balancing act of meeting the needs of all these internal and external stakeholders.
Yes, that's certainly true, Costa, in terms of, and I think that's why we changed from stakeholders and you know, the big thing in the industry these days is, are we focused on our shareholders or are we focused on our stakeholders? And I love the discussion with Enron, where they did an assessment in terms of, although we had so many people that lost their pensions with the Enron debacle, how many families were affected and how many societies and communities were affected? So what is the downstream effect on creating problems within the organization? And I don't think we realize that as executives and elements like that. It's not just about those people that you engage with. It's about your customers. It's about your employees. It's about their families. It's about all of those different areas that we're dealing with.
Yes, and just from a changed culture perspective, I'd just like to add to that good question. And I did fill in the chat there that it's important to realize that you can't engage with all the stakeholders. So you need to identify, whether it's internal and external, who are the key influencers with the most credibility. Because if you get a large variety of those people on board, the rest will follow. So it's to direct your energy and leverage off those credible influencers to get the results quicker and easier. Because if there's 10,000 stakeholders, you don't have time to go to all of those stakeholders.
Yeah, Tammy, you're right. In terms of shareholders are an element in the stakeholder. So they're not excluded from the equation, but we now need to focus on the wider level, being everybody that's impacted. And Christine, just to bring about, and I certainly understand when we're getting to change programs, we focus on the influences. When we start looking at the value-based model within the organization in terms of how does everyone make decisions, and are they making it in the right light, I would go as far as to say that it's everybody that's going to be responsible for making decisions that needs to be making them according to the set of values on the value-based model. Okay.
I would agree, Howard. And also just on the stakeholder, shareholder point of view. So customers and employees are becoming a lot more demanding and discerning. And they're not just wanting, you know, the business purpose to deliver on their goals. So focusing on shareholder value. It's now really, you know, the external community, the external country. It's like, really, what is this business offering them? So there's a whole community drive as well. So, I mean, shareholders and stakeholders are an interesting topic, but good point raised.
Right. Excellent. So let's go on. And Christine, this is your section. So just to get there. So we're now talking about culture transformation and change.
Yeah. Thank you, Howard. Good afternoon, everybody. So there's so many culture models, and culture is one of those things that elude us because it's not all clearly seen on the surface. There is a lot of undertones, undercurrents, and to really understand this, a lot of models have been put together, but the best one that I have come across is this one put together by Spencer Stewart, and it's based on a lot of culture theory. And if you have a look, it's not saying that any culture is particularly good or bad. It's saying it needs to be appropriate for the business drivers that need to with the kind of results that the business wants. So it's very important for alignment to happen between strategy, outcomes, and then also purpose. And not to forget values. Values are a subset of culture. If those are put together and they're aligned, so people are aligned, their values are aligned to the organizational's values, the strategy, the themes, the organization becomes a very dynamic engine that can deliver on the focus. So you've got an X and Y axis that looks at flexibility and stability on the vertical, and then on the horizontal you've got dependence and interdependence. And to really look at that, we'll look at it on another slide, but these are different CEOs. And if you actually have a look at the comments, you can clearly see that it kind of speaks to the leadership. They kind of stand for, like Tesla stands for innovation and learning and changing the status quo. So higher flexibility is required. Less stability, he's a millionaire and then he's a billionaire and then he's got nothing. So it's less about that than it is about innovation and leadership. And, Disney, it's never about the money, it's about caring, and they talk about their customers as being guests. So you can understand that the appropriate culture there would be caring. So, yeah, I mean, we don't really know in South Africa Zappos, but let's just look at GSK. Thank you. They are also very, very structured, very results orientated. It's a highly competitive environment, so it would make sense. If you think of a body regulator, maybe like the Reserve Bank, it would be important, like Hawaii, to really look at less flexibility, but focus more on authority, stability. This just goes to show different CEOs that have different takes. I don't know if there are any questions or input before we move to the next slide. Or Howard, if you would like to add? Yeah.
I want to say, looking at the Securities and Exchange Commission and Lloyd's, you can see that's an environment where, they're very sort of risk averse. I mean, here it's about rules and stability and certainty, and I would imagine the Reserve Bank is the same. Whereas, Tesla up at the top, this is an entrepreneurial spirit where risk is part of the game, part of the fun. So certainly down at the bottom, Lloyd's and the SEC, it's a more rules-based sort of order, rules-based, and try to minimize risks. This is about certainty and stability. So it's just be interesting to see their risk profiles also come into it.
Yeah, you're 100% correct, Costa. And I know I work with in the regulator industry, one of my customers, and man, you just mentioned the word risk, and there's shakes that go on, and they'll do anything to avoid that. So it is about having that confidence, and the people having the confidence that you're looking after that area for the country, for the community, for the globe. That's what it's about. They expect you to be cautious. They expect the way in which you operate to be stable in the effect that you have on the country.
Yeah, and I think Howard, what's clear about this culture model and really works is it's not about what is the best culture. It's about what is the best suited culture for the organization, its core business. And that is why it's flexible, and organizations can change culture based on a direction that's taken, or they won't do a 360-degree turn, but they can certainly shift slightly to the right or the left or up or down. So it's important to note that.
And Christine, you also made a point when we were discussing the slide to say that whilst you have the Lloyd's of London that are on the safety area, we also remember that you may have departments within the Lloyd's of London that are doing creative culture, innovative work. I know for one of the customers, they have one of my customers, they're in this area and they set up an innovation hub, and they work hard at changing that thinking within that group, not the thinking across the group, but thinking within the group. That is important. Okay.
And also, sorry, I was typing while you were talking there. We can certainly share this link to this white paper by Harvard Business Review. It's really a good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got quite all those references at the bottom, so we will be able to share the list of links.
Okay, so just to talk about the culture model quickly, you can read further on your own. If you look at the horizontal, it's talking more about how people interact. So independence versus interdependence. And then on the vertical axis, we're looking at more around the relationship, and it's around flexibility and stability. Now, if you're looking at the dimensions, really, let's just take the flexibility versus stability, the people interactions, that is really looking at consistency. So on the flexibility side, it's really how adaptive, how responsive are we? How are our relationships, our receptiveness to change, because this is about responsiveness to change. And then on the other side, it's about consistency, predictability, and influence in relationships. If we look at the horizontal, where we're looking at independence and interdependence, that's looking at a whole new ballgame, because the one is looking at stability, effectiveness of the group. It's about the interdependent side is about coordinating effectiveness of the group, managing relationships. It's using those maneuvers to kind of, when you establish or understand the culture, it's to look at these two, they're looking at these terms and coming up with a culture that fits that, and looking at where they need to go and what the gap is. So it's a very nice model. Thank you. So what happened is they did a survey to a number of companies, and they asked them to choose two of the most dominant cultures that they can relate to. And they identified, you can see there's a huge difference. If you look at the column on the far right, there's a difference. So caring and results were the two highest. The rest were very far behind. And it's quite interesting because they're almost at the opposite ends of the spectrum, and they each have pros and cons. So that's just to the point to say that not every culture, there's no right culture or wrong culture. And what is very interesting is on a strategic value discipline level, if you are customer centric, you more than likely would fit into caring and purpose. If you are about product leadership, the kind of culture styles would be more learning, enjoyment and results. And then operational excellence would kind of be more relevant to be authority, safety, and order. So it's very interesting to see that organizations can already have a clear picture of what they should be driving towards and where the gap is, and to understand the advantages and disadvantages in that equation. Howard, I'm not sure if you, Costa, want to add anything.
Yeah, so this was really good for data governance people. When you see the disadvantages, you need to pay attention to that from a data governance point of view. So let's take the situation of authority. There's an overemphasis on strong authority and bold decision making that may lead to political conflict. And sort of when you do some of those areas, then you start to see the data hoarding, the silos developing. You're not getting collaboration or agreement. You're getting a level of dictation. Now, depends on the company, but some people don't always respond well to that. And you can start finding some negative behavior and even to an extent some fear of data. So these are the type of things that you have to say, well, I've got it, I've got this area. If I'm picking up this feeling of challenge, then I may need to do something to correct it. Costa?
Howard, I just wanted, what's interesting for me, this model, those two culture styles that come up, results and caring. We'll look at it when we discuss shortly the value-based decision-making model. It's interesting, caring up at the top ties in with what we mentioned earlier about Ubuntu, you know, the social harmony of Ubuntu. So it very much speaks to the social and more the moral or sort of ethical imperative, and is definitely focused to external stakeholders. And the results one, we'll see how, you know, our different perspectives in our model, the economic imperative comes here. It's got to be practical, pragmatic. This is about cost benefits. So it's interesting. And as Christine said, they're almost at, I think Ubuntu can reconcile them. You can reconcile Ubuntu harmony with profits. So it's interesting, those two that Christine said are on sort of opposite ends of the spectrum, but I guess the trick is here to reconcile the two, and they can coexist.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. You get mixed cultures and subcultures as well. So in a organization, you might have a mixture of these. Just 2 points. I mean, from an executive leadership perspective, one of the important messages is to kind of say, as leaders of the organization, you are actually responsible to define, direct, and make the right decisions. Now, that is done with data and the appreciation of value of data. In an organization that is going to take decision-making seriously, data-driven decision-making, the first steps in that direction would be, you know, good data literacy, understand the value of data, quality of data. Those are critical starting points. But then what I realized working with Howard was data is transformation. You're actually transforming your business. You're not just working with data. It requires behavior change. It requires a mindset change. It's a huge upskilling opportunity. And like any asset, as you start treating it with respect and value, it gives back more. So it's the sophistication journey that Howard talks about. And just as leaders, it's a critical role that you play. If your strategy is not aligned to your purpose and your values, Costa will talk a bit about values, you're not going to achieve or really get the value you can get from data and use that, you know, data decision making as your real asset, your real special skill. So I just wanted to mention that at this level, that for me, I can't overemphasize the role that the executive team and leaders will play in this journey.
I think that leads well into the next screen, I'm going to sort of go a little bit. So we're running out of time, but this was a great screen that you put together to basically say that it starts with the exec at an individual level, that starts to demonstrate actions and behaviors externally, that then creates collective values, the values at a collective level that start to drive collective actions and behaviors. So the people that drive this are the execs, as you've just mentioned.
Agreed. Excellent follow-up slide. Howard, I hand over to you now. If there aren't any questions.
Yeah, so this was really just the whole system that we spoke about. Is first of all, we get personal alignment, then we get the mission alignment, and we then structural alignment in terms of the way in which we build our teams, and then we get the values alignment. So those are the changes that we go through in bringing about a change transformation. And then let's go to the value-based model that Costa will be talking to. Costa?
Yeah, thanks, Howard. Let's have a look at that. So yeah, so using the value-based decision-making model, how our values have to be, clarify our values and how they have to be aligned to our actions, and then ultimately to inform the decisions that we make. So I think really here, I think what I want to just emphasize here is, as the heading says, is throw away the rule book and just live the values. It's about the actions and the behaviors. And I think really this speaks to positive motivation. I don't think rules inspire us they make us do the bare minimum. And I speak from an ethics perspective as well. The rules and the codes, you really, you should, it's the act, as somebody said earlier, it's what you do when nobody's watching. And maybe when it's unsupervised reliability or unsupervised ethics or behavior, ethical conduct and behavior. And I think this is, and also to tie ethics in ethical values into values, it's more about inspiration and less about regulation. So I think values and guiding principles are there to motivate us and to inspire us, rather than really being fixated about the rules. It's as it says here, live the values. So it goes to accountability as well. So people then are responsible and accountable for their behaviors. So yeah, here we're just really looking at that statement by Benjamin Franklin, and it's really what he's saying here is the choices we make, and the value system that we choose is the most important decision that we will ever make in our lives. Just to emphasize the importance that values play as guiding principles. And they can be obviously personal values and company values, but these are really the beliefs, the behaviors that we agree to live by daily. And it affects everything from internal employee relations with our customers, with the broader community and society. Really, the best way to test the values is to live them, is to apply them every day. And I think certainly now in times, we're in this predicament of difficult times. It's a time of destruction and confusion and uncertainty. I think when we have to make those tough decisions, and in these difficult times, you revert back to your values. And it provides the company, maybe you have to review your values and reassess them, but certainly it provides a sense of stability, security, maybe some certainty and safety to the employees as well, if you can go back to your values. And this is where leadership, the clarification, and leaders have to continuously review values and look at values. So I guess what we're trying to say is you cannot spend a lot of time on values. It's really think values constantly. They guide both ethical and business behaviors. And you could also look at it as a competitive advantage. So core values, the bottom line, let's face it, the bottom line is important. But I guess it starts with core values. Why are you in business? What is your purpose? Just the steps along the decision-making life cycle, from a data perspective, from data gathering to processing to putting in meaning. We often speak about putting truth before meaning, Howard, and then the decision-making, and then the responses that you have and how these conscious beliefs, the values play a role. And there are also subconscious beliefs. We also look at there's subconscious prejudices and bias. We see that with machine learning and with artificial intelligence, where when you make these decisions, I think also for leaders, what's important, maybe we haven't touched on it, is diversity in your teams, so that you get a wide variety of sort of personal values have to be taken into account as well, which have to be reconciled or aligned with the company values. And so that's very important. And then we spoke earlier about the role that inspiration, to be inspired rather than be guided by regulations. Thank you.
Yeah, this was something that Christine and I have been talking about for quite some time, where when we gathering data, we're looking at the sensors, we're looking at the data that we have, and then we start to build information about that, and we refer to that as information processing, where you start to get an understanding of what's happened. And then we start to look for meaning, and it's interesting that meaning can be broken up into these different levels. Christina, you had a nice way of putting it. I think it was the heart and the.
Yes.
How did you?
You know how people do a lot of work in their head, but that doesn't drive the right behavior or action. What needs to happen is it needs to be transferred from the head and processed to the heart. So, what are the feelings and the motivators, the why that drives me to actually act, which is the hand? So, I mean, my process, I love this model because it explains that process beautifully, and it even goes to soul mind, which is our higher self. So I really like this model, but I took from head to heart, and then hand is action. And there are quite a few models on that, but it just simply puts, a lot of organizations try and change culture by feeding people with information and lots of head stuff. But people need to feel the sense of belonging. They need to relate to the values. They need to understand the change, and then they'll act. So really, what does data mean to me? How is it going to enable my life? What value does it bring? And how does my job change? Is really the process that goes on before they can actually, make the action or the hand part. So yes, I like this model a lot.
And then what was important here in terms of these levels is, as we are looking for meaning, we have to be careful. Then it sort of translates into decision making. And if you're just operating at this body level, then you're reacting with the gut instincts that we're referring to. Now, these gut instincts, and even sometimes you have to, because you don't have enough data, they should be guided by the values and the inspiration within the company. So that's how we start bringing the value system to control and to get some harmony between the cognitive biases and the conscious and the subconscious beliefs. These are all beliefs that people are operating different within the company, but the values is the area that we can focus on and establish a common value set of values within the organization. Costa?
Thank you, Howard. So we're at our values-based decision-making model. And here it's really, we're looking at, how problem recognition, recognizing the problem, and then we feed it into the input. You go into the different perspectives or categories, and we'll look at those, the theoretical, the social, the political, the religious, the aesthetic, and the economic. And that's where machine learning sort of takes over, and the machine starts helping us. It's a much quicker process of helping us to make the decision. And this is really the flow this is how we're trying to make me think more like an electrical engineer, not like a lawyer and an ethicist. But it's important because all these different perspectives or categories, and then the synthesis of all those perspectives. So if we look at it here on a bigger table here you can see how we tend to spend. We were discussing it earlier with Howard. We were saying how we spend a lot of time on the theoretical and on the economic, and there's sound reason for that, because there are technical issues and there's a rational scientific reason, and it's about problem solving. It goes to functionality, really, and seeking the best fit to put it back to data, the best fit, and it's about functional and rational. This is more the truth, as we said, truth before meaning. And we also focus, obviously, on the economic. In business, you have to be practical, it's utility, pragmatism is important, and the cost benefit. But the areas that we don't seem to, that we have to reconcile, and we have to sort of bring in the social harmony of Ubuntu, the Ubuntu of data, is the social, the political, the religious, and the aesthetic. And I think the social very much goes to society's benefit, really. What's best for society, whereas the moral and ethical is more about what's best for humanity, maybe a higher order sort of thinking about those higher guiding principles, let's say universal principles. If we're looking at the data and the privacy space, the principles of beneficence, the principles of proportionality, explicability, all those higher universal fairness, all those principles that most societies would uphold, especially when we look at privacy and data. And then the political, the religious, okay, they've put ethical and philosophical, the elevation of mankind under religious. That can also be, I would also say that you could look at that as humanistic or maybe spiritual as well. I mean, you can be an ethical person and you don't have to be religious. You can be an atheist, and you can be a religious person and not be ethical. The aesthetic, I think the part that comes out is harmony, and this is really when we're talking about the harmony. A key value in Ubuntu is social harmony, and that comes from mutual respect and exercising goodwill, and really having that common purpose, bringing it back to values, having those shared values that unite us. I don't want to dwell on the political as a perspective or a category. Suffice to say that in surveys done in the US, 43% of people say they get very stressed by the polarization and the division and the conflict in the political arena. And I think in South Africa too, we can certainly say we suffer from PTSD when we look at, we understand the political, it's about power and it's about ego. So, but these are all important perspectives because they all play a role and they all play an influence in helping us make these decisions. All these paradigms, all these perspectives and categories are fed in, and the machine is really what helps us make sense of them in terms, well, at least speeds up the process. Because if we had to take all these conflicting values and try and decide on a ranking here, we'd be caught up, we'd be taking a hell of a long time to try and decide. So in our next, moving on to our next model here, this is really where we see how the central database refers to the past decisions people have made. And here this is where we're using AI and machine learning to provide perspectives and decision-making to get new decisions. So there you have the input. It goes through all those different theoretical, social, all those perspectives and categories that we've spoken about. This is to get some kind of synthesis here. Often we get stuck. When you get all the values-based perspectives of all these areas, this is really a look at it as a machine-readable map of what exists. So each classifier checks its perspective, and then that's the input, and then it comes out, and you have human oversight. You have a discussion area where humans can teach the machine then how to assess and combine the different outputs. So here in the group discussion area, the humans are part of the agreeing on a final decision. But clearly, people, if you look at consensus, it can take a long time. So, or trying to reach consensus. So people are not that quick enough to consider decisions across all these perspectives. So this is where the machine learning can analyze the decision from all these perspectives that are required to be values-based. And it suggests a decision in terms of a perspective. I think so. Yeah, each class fits its perspective and feeds a result, and then maybe these results can be consolidated to build a complete view that involves people. I think, Howard, we were discussing and saying it's really an expert system that tries to emulate how a human would respond by interacting with experts to understand the best results. So taking all these perspectives into account. So the machine helps the human, but the human also teaches the machine how to assess and combine the outputs from these underlying perspectives.
Yeah, and this was a great one in terms of the chat we had on big data this month on neurosemantics and neurocognitive learning. And this one is really nice, where they're now suggesting it's one of the ways that you can check to see whether digital decisions made, let's put them on the left-hand side here. If there's a machine learning thing about approving credit or whatever, it can then be brought into a set of classifiers like this that can take different perspectives of that decision. And I think that's the first time people view take a different view on how do we get almost machines to help us understand the outcomes or the perspectives of decision making. And so that was a really helpful approach that they're taking to this model. Costa, thanks very much for that. And so that's really helpful to understand this. How do we bring about a value-based decision model? Because that's going to guide us in decision making. It has to be that oversight of the type of decisions we're making and helping us establish a common value system within the organization. And of course, all of this is certainly based on this model that we've presented on several occasions in terms of the different questions that need to be asked, in terms of the business, the different technologies that we use, and the different levels of data culture that we're dealing with. So through all of this, we're looking at answering the questions, understanding the outcomes, supporting the decision making, and then making sure that we have a value-based system that's understanding the outcomes and the decisions that we are inferring from our data. Okay, and then we progress to the Ubuntu of data. If we constantly looking at achieving social harmony of the data, now we're not going to get there overnight. We have to really just walk along these steps, one area is one step at a time, but it's just helpful to recognize when we're going off course and we can now bring ourselves back, and how do we bring ourselves back in line again, where we aiming for that, what we refer to as the Ubuntu of data. All right. And of course, this was trying to simplify it again in terms of looking at our trust and distrust and agreement. We keep on coming back to the situation of the better our agreement is and the better the trust we have, now we can start lifting ourselves up on this culture to achieve a knowledge-driven approach. That's where we want to get to. And then when we're on the other sides, and of course this can happen within areas or departments within your organization. So don't think that you're going to be everybody fearing data. That's not the case. Or everybody hoarding data. That's typically not the case. Or everyone having high impact of data. So these are all different areas that you're focusing on within your company. And when you see these areas of agreement and trust, and now you can start applying these different decision making and value, deriving the value. So that's when we bring in this decision model and decision cycle that we refer to. And so that's how we bring data in that will support this. But really, data is we've got to get these top levels right. We've got to get the governance, we've got to get the culture, we've got to get the ethics. And data is in this middle area that's being controlled by the outer circles and the settings that executives provide us with. Once we've got that, then the data can flow. Then the data can be released to do what it needs to do. But we've got to get this high-level setup working. And then just some of the books that have helped us with this thing. These are the 5 questions that we had, and decision quality. I've mentioned them on some of the talks before. How do we just understand the decision making, and how do we achieve quality? A very nice trusted advisors. So if any of you are setting yourselves up as advisors, there's this interesting trust equation. And I know Costa and I spent quite a bit of time talking. Ratios have always worked for me. When I look at measuring something, a ratio always works, that thing between 0 and 1 that I get, because I don't have some people sitting as way outliers on either end of the scale. I can bring them into these 2 different areas. So this is a simple diagram of the trust equation. Self-orientation, and there's a nice assessment for you guys to do if you'd like, personal values and awareness. And so at the top level, we're dealing with common good. At the bottom level, we're dealing with self-interest. And if you're living in the self-interest world, that self-orientation number gets really high. And so your trustworthiness decreases. That's the impact of self-interest, self-orientation. Now apply that to a business. If the self-interest is money, and remember, money is not the end, and money is a means to the end. So everybody focuses on money, but where's that money going to go to? What is the end state? Is that end the board? Is it the exec? Is it the company? What is the purpose for that? And if the end is common good, then That's the orientation that we're trying to work out. Have we got the right purpose? And then intimacy talks about, are people willing to share their secrets? Are they willing to share their strategies, knowing that you're not going to go and share it with everybody, their competitors? So what is their intimacy with you, and how well do they trust you? And then, of course, there's credibility, saying what you know and feel, and then always doing as expected. So those are the core elements of being a trusted advisor. And then we've got the trusted exec. Now, there's similar type of scenarios. So it's trustworthy, a different definition at an exec level, but saying the same thing. Trust factor, that's also important. And I like this definition of saying a person is trustworthy if he or she completes what is promised, and if this cannot be done, notifies you so that you can make other arrangements. Simple as that. That's when the trust in the individual starts to develop, and then the same as if it's a company. Can you do it as a company? And if you can't do it, make sure you can tell the customer, and they can make alternative arrangements. And then the last slide is all the different articles, and I just wanted to share with you the way and I don't know if you guys have seen this in Edge, the latest version of Edge, but you can build a collections page, and you can basically build all the different websites that you found data from. And the nice thing about it is when you're ready to produce something, you can send it to Excel, and you get a list of all of your references, and that's what's coming there. And then also, again, just to share with you, I really like this website on intrinsic values or critical thinking. This made me think a lot more about this value system that we're trying to establish. How do we detect our values? What are the different types of values? Is this a means to an end, or is it the end? And in some cases, they both. And then the one area, which is this reflective equilibrium. So as you understand what your intuitions are, you develop principles. From principles, you can then predict on a concrete case, and you keep on going round and round in the circle. So that's sort of all about setting values within the organization. And I believe that we need to help organizations, and we need to be able to communicate to the executive board that's setting this, is when they get the values right, they help us with the data decision making that we after, that we using the data in the appropriate way. Any comments, Costa, Christine, is anything that I've missed out on?
No, I think that covers it. Thank you, Howard.
Excellent. Any questions?
I was just going to summarize on rules that the heart of culture, and it goes to values as well, is not revealed by rules of behavior, but it's a deeper level of understanding. It's the perceptions, the feelings, it's the beliefs, it's the values that arise in those critical situations where you have to make a decision. So that's just to reinforce this idea of, let's, as you said, as we started off, let's move beyond the rules.
Great. Paul, I'm not sure if there are any questions, or I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Howard. Yes, just people dropping off closer to 5 o'clock saying thank you very much. Awesome presentation and very informative. So that was the general consensus. So thank you again to you, Howard, and Costa and Christine, for all the preparation.